Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding a discussion on how MOPAC and the VRU ensure commissioned services are being delivered for London. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Desai and Assembly Member Garbett, for whom Assembly Member Russell is attending as a substitute, and Assembly Member Moema will be joining the meeting remotely later this morning.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of November 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. And we're now going to move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our first guest, which is Lib Peck. Good to see you, Lib. It's been a few years, I think, since you've been here in front of us. So we're going to go into the questions, as you know. First of all, just to set the scene, for anybody that doesn't know, Lib is the director of the Violence Reduction Unit. I just think I should point out a couple of things. So violence without injury in the last year has gone up 5%. Gun crime has gone up 29.2%. Knife crime has gone up 12.7%. Knife crime with injury has gone up 4%. Total robbery 9.9%. Personal robbery 0.7%. But business robbery has gone up 82.5%. So not looking really very good. I think you'll all agree. So the first question, and actually before I start, can I say thank you for coming at such short notice. We should be looking at the police and crime plan, but it's not been published yet, which is annoying to us all. So I'm very, very grateful you've given up what you were doing to get here, and we'll make sure you're finished by 11 to go to your other event. Okay, so the Met has reported that robbery is a key challenge, and over a third of knife crime-enabled robbery victims are children. What specific action has the VRU taken over the past year to reduce the risk of young Londoners being victims of robbery, and what impact is this work actually having?
Thank you. So, yes, you're right that robbery has been a concern for some time, and I think you're right also to draw the distinction between personal robbery and business robbery, and it's really personal robbery that we as a unit focus on, and that is, as you said, that particular issue affecting young people. So in the context of that question, I think the one thing that we have benefited from is some investment from the Mayor, looking at the personal robbery that takes place, particularly around mobile phones, particularly around schools, and thinking about how we can target resources best. And so that has gone to 15 boroughs, all of whom are in the boroughs where the problem is most pronounced. So it's data-led, and it's for them to come back to us with suggestions of how they would want to deploy that extra money so that they can keep those young people safe. And what that has really focused on since September, when that resource has been made available, is them thinking about detached youth work around after schools. It's thinking about people's travel to and from school, which we know is actually a very big concern for young people. And those 15 boroughs have all marked out exactly where they're going to be deploying those extra resources. But it's very intensive, I suppose, relying on the kind of role that youth workers and bystanders can play in a preventative sense. And we know from all the other work that we do that that is a key relationship for young people. That is one part of a much bigger programme, of course, that the Mayor is doing in terms of tackling robbery. But that is our role, I think, in trying to reduce robbery, particularly as it affects young people. It is, I'm afraid, too early to see the impact of that because, as I mentioned, that came as funding in this year's budget. That was all commissioned out in September. So we are looking to see how that impacts next year. But you will also, I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Sorry, a couple of questions from that. First of all, the 15 boroughs. That's noted down where? Where can I find those 15?
I can read them out to you now if that's helpful, or I can send you a link to them.
If you could send us a link or send us...
Yeah, that's fine.
And where we can find out exactly what those boroughs are doing. Because, of course, when this was first started, the VRU, we had assumed it would be London-wide, and then it started getting reduced, didn't it?
Oh, no, we do a mixture. I mean, there are London-wide programmes that are really important, such as youth workers in hospitals, or youth workers in custody suites, or provision of mentors across PRUs, pupil referral units across London. Each of the boroughs has to produce a serious a strategic needs assessment in terms of the profile of violence in their area. All of them use a very similar framework to do that because we've worked with all of them. So there are lots of things that are London-wide, but as you would expect, with resources such as they are, but also patterns of violence such as they are, we do make sure that we actually target as well particular neighbourhoods or specific areas. And in this context, working out whether and how youth work can play a role in robbery, particularly in relation to young people, we have obviously focused on the areas where it is most problematic. And
Okay.
Yeah, but happy to send you that list.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. You talk about resources stretched. You've got, I think last year you had 40 million. Is that right?
Not last year, no. But yeah, but carry on. Sorry.
Well, no,
did you want the correction of the figure?
Please correct me. And
Okay.
if you've seen the draft budget, which I assume you have seen, what are you anticipating your funding will be next year?
Okay, let me get you the precise figure, which I have got. Yeah. So our budget for next year at the moment is 36.7 million. And that's a combination of Home Office grant, where we've had consistent money from the Home Office, as well as money from the Mayor.
Okay. So if we take this latest, the 15 boroughs, the money you're spending there, how much money are you spending on that scheme that you've just mentioned?
Okay, in terms of the robbery, that's, I think, 3... Let me have a look. Yes, that's 3.3 million over the 2 years to fund the programme of localised interventions.
Okay, fine. One of the things you and I had discussions about was KPIs and the lack of them. And I understand that if this didn't start till October, it's hard to see what's happening.
Yes.
But if I were to be talking to you this time next year, what KPIs have you got around that funding? So that I can say to you, that's great, it really worked very well, or what on earth has gone wrong with that then?
Yeah.
Or somewhere in between?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, the kind of big KPIs are we seeing a reduction in personal robbery? And one of the things that you started talking about was around the kind of annual figures around violence. But obviously, we also look at that in the context of a broader remit from when the Violence Reduction Unit started up. But the figures around robbery and whether that's been reduced are important for us. But also looking at KPIs in terms of whether kids feel safer, which is really important, and whether they are feeling more safe to travel to and from school, and whether they're more likely probably to attend school, were the kind of KPIs we would begin to look at in terms of robbery. So So you're going to wait till the end before you assess it, or have you got interim assessment points? Interim. And also we do publish, I mean, I think you could look on our website and you will see a performance dashboard that is there and gives you the KPIs that we'll be using on all of the programmes, gives you how we're complying with them, gives you the money that is allocated to each of the programme, and therefore gives us an insight into which programmes we need to be monitoring more carefully and which not. And that's consistent across all of the 34 programmes that we're investing in, as well as the grants. So that's fairly straightforward and would be up there for you to look at.
We waited a very long time for that, but pleased to see that that is now up and running.
Sorry, if I could just intervene for a moment. Obviously, that wasn't straightforward at the beginning, but it has been published for some time now. So please do look at it. It's published every single quarter and gives you that information. What we were hoping that we would have was an interactive dashboard, which we have got and we can use internally. We are, at the moment, unfortunately, not being able to share that and for others to use it, partly because obviously the IT transfer and also because of the cyber attack on TfL, but that is also now available. So all of the information in terms of how you would interrogate programmes, see impact, see money spent is very much is accessible.
Good. Look forward to doing that then. In its Q1 performance report, the VRU stated that the grant for the robbery fund, this will be the one we've just spoken about.
Yeah.
That's the same one. Okay. There's in your own something I read somewhere, analysis somewhere said that, and it always has been, that robbery for children does peak straight after school.
Yeah.
Ever since I've been involved in policing, that has been the thing. And because children are obviously targets of violence, what is specifically being done from the sort of 4 to 5 hour that there is a real issue?
Okay, so we do. So we look, obviously, and map out through evidence what are the times that young people are most vulnerable and in what situations. And our overall strategy and programme has been looking at those periods and seeing where we can invest to have impact. And part of that is getting kids back into school and keeping them safe inside school. And part of that, as you've just referred to, is what happens after school. And I suppose there are 3 kind of areas that we've done, all of which are quite reliant, I have to say, on youth workers and mentors, because what we found throughout all of our programme is it's that special relationship with a trusted adult that very often makes a critical difference to young people's life opportunities. So we have the after-school work that we've done, which is called Stronger Futures, where we invest in areas across London and through organisations that are very close to the ground and have a presence in the area, and that's been running for a couple of years, and that has good stats in terms of how many numbers of young people it's reached. That's 46,000 young people that have been reached. The second thing is thinking about the holiday period, where that is also really critical for us, where we know that kids without anything to do, kids in homes that are not safe, kids trying to travel around sometimes is much more problematic. So thinking about how we can extend that holiday offer, and this year, through the Stronger Future programme, we had the biggest coverage that we had as a unit, but also working very closely with London boroughs, were able to offer a much more comprehensive offer. And then finally, there is that immediate after school period around some of the schools where we know that robbery is a particular danger for young people, and it's a danger in terms of their feelings of safety, and that's where we've now got this added capacity to make sure that there are youth workers around the schools, or indeed some of the boroughs will have other schemes that they think are best suited to the localised problem, working critically with the schools. So those are sort of 3 of the things that overlap or have a very similar kind of importance in terms of the connection between youth workers and young people.
Okay, so over the past 5 years, of all the priority areas, where do you think, what area are you most proud of? What your best success rate? Where have you had the most impact?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, over the 5 years, we've reached 350,000.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Over the 5 years, we've reached 350,000 young people. I think that we know from the KPIs, and we know from talking to young people and talking to the professionals that work with them, the programmes that we've invested in have all had a positive impact on young people. But I would say probably the ones that are most easy to substantiate, and therefore the ones that I think I feel most proud of, are the custody-based youth workers, where we see that under the age of 18, that if young people have taken up that opportunity to speak to a youth worker, 90% of them don't reoffend for the next year.
90%?
90%, yes, under the age of 18, which I think is a very important statistic. The hospital-based youth work, which we have taken over and intensified and made much more comprehensive across the 12 hospitals in London, where we see the greatest number of kids coming in having been the victim of violence, which includes 4 of the major trauma units. We've just had the figures released from that, and we see that there is 74% reduction in the risk that those young people feel having engaged with a youth worker in that setting, which again I think is a really important statistic. And I was really delighted that the Mayor extended the Mentors in Pupil Referral Unit scheme as part of his new administration. So we've now got coverage in all of the boroughs and in 43 schools, because again what we get back from the teachers in those schools is an 84% increase in attendance and an 82%, no, it's the other way around, it's an 84% increase in behaviour and an 82% increase in attendance, both of which are key. So those London-wide programmes that are tailored to the specific situations in which young people find themselves most under threat, I think we've seen impact.
Okay, I'm pleased to hear that. In just a couple of words, what is your biggest concern in the area for which you're responsible? What's the most challenging? Briefly.
Briefly, okay, there are several. We know what the long-term drivers of violence are. We've all talked about these here before. Poverty is a big one. Poverty has been on the rise. We also know that local authorities, which are the key placemaker in an area and provide much of the support around young people, have seen their budgets dramatically cut, and that in many cases we're hearing of councils not being able to, or potentially going into financial administration. That is a challenge. That needs to be reversed. For us personally, that's a difficult context. I feel like we've been swimming against the tide. That needs to be alleviated. But I suppose there's also an ongoing challenge, which is hard, where I think we've made impact, is how you do partnership work across London.
Talking of partnership work, how much do you get involved with the police?
We have a secondee in our unit from the police. We always have had a secondee.
No, I mean, do you talk to the Commissioner about where his issues are, that money from the VRU would help?
Yeah. I mean, I work with the police very closely. I mean, we have.
Have you spoken to the Commissioner ever about where would be good for you to work together?
Have you? Yeah. Sorry, I don't understand why you're surprised by that. Yeah, I mean, I join the. Quite often join the meetings with the Mayor and the Commissioner, which take place fortnightly. I have conversations with Lynn Owens, his deputy. I work with Matt Ward, who's the lead for violence, and we meet up on a monthly basis. We have a secondee who's in the team.
All right. Okay.
Well, sorry, I just wanted to reassure you, because I think that's an important partner for us, clearly.
It certainly is an important part, so I'm interested that you have spoken to them about where to put the funding.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Could I just give one example, tangible example of that for you? No?
No, if at the end we've got time.
It was a nice example. No, that's fine.
I want to make sure you go by the time that you're and we've all champing at the bit to ask you questions. So I've got supplementaries on here, first from Caroline and then from Sean.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and I'll be as speedy as possible. You mentioned mentors in pupil referral units and the impact that they're having. I am aware that many pupil referral units are having problems with attendance. Are you having, do you have mentors in every pupil referral unit in London? And if not, how, you also mentioned about poverty and deprivation being one of the drivers of violence affecting young people. How are you focusing where your mentors are helping out?
Thank you. The reason we thought that mentors in pupil referral units were incredibly important, because I'm sure you're all aware that the trajectory for young people in pupil referral units is not a positive one, unfortunately, when you look at the number of people in prison who've been excluded from school. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done further up the system, but just to focus for a moment on pupil referral units and not to stigmatise them. We then worked with teachers and worked with our young people's action group, who I know you've had the pleasure of meeting before, about thinking about what would really help in that context. And the mentor was really, really important. Alongside, and I saw you mouth that, Sean Bailey, which is parents, and they are really important as well. And making sure that we are offering those young people a trusted adult in their life to give them guidance. So we've seen some really, really good results in terms of that. And I think I just referred to them about 84% increase in attendance and 84% increase in behaviour and 82% increase in attendance. So that's why that has been rolled out across London. You were going to ask me?
Can you put your microphone on, and can we keep this shorter, or we're not going to get to the end of our questions?
The mentors are available for every pupil referral unit.
At the moment, it's 43 out of 53, but in every single borough, and that's because the other 10 pupil referral units haven't as yet quite taken up on that offer.
Thank you.
Okay, but yeah, it's a really good scheme, but does need, sorry, just one quick point, does need to be harnessed, I think, with an approach towards mainstream schools as well, which is where we're doing a lot of work around inclusion, and we have a London-wide inclusion charter, and where it's really important that we're using those resources to make sure that we are listening to kids and getting kids back into school, because you are right, kids are safer in school, and at the moment we have a real problem with absenteeism as well as exclusions and suspensions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. You've talked about the impact of the work, and if you look at one end, it would sound really great, but the reality is all of these crime indicators are on the upward swing. So do you think that the work you're doing is focused in the right area? Because you've talked about huge numbers of children who've gone through it, but they are not the perpetrators. So what work are you doing specifically with the small amount of children, because it always is a small amount, that are actually committing particularly these robberies? Because you're contacting a lot of children, but are you contacting the correct children?
I didn't at the beginning, but I do think it is quite important in terms of context and when we're looking at success. I didn't mention the overall figures for London since when the Violence Reduction Unit started, so I'm very alert to the fact that we've got a year-on-year increase in some of the areas, but I do think it is important to contextualise it since 2019, and what we've seen since then is quite marked reduction in homicide, 24%. We've seen a marked reduction in knife crime with victims under 25 of 27%, and we've also seen a gun crime reduction of 18% and a personal robbery reduction of 17%. Personal robbery, I'm not talking about business robbery, which I think the Chair referred earlier to the big difference between those. So I just want to put those statistics actually out there as well, so we don't run away with the idea that that things aren't working, because I think in a longer term sense they probably are working. But I'll come to your point, sorry, because your point wasn't that. Your point was much more around the specific kids at risk and what we are doing and how we're working with them.
I want to be very clear. They're not the kids at risk, they're the kids putting other kids at risk, and that's the point I want to make. How much of your work is acknowledging the fact that these kids are putting other children at risk, and they are making people at risk? We always talk about them as if the world has put them at risk, but they are causing risk to these children. What work are you specifically doing to target them to make sure that the vast majority of children are actually safe? Bearing in mind, the context is this is on an upward trajectory, robbery against young children in particular.
I think that's quite a difficult question, actually. Not because I can't answer it, but I'm not quite sure I agree with the premise of it. I think that the point that what we are trying to do is we are trying to do two things, I suppose. One is, how do you keep young people safe? And there's a whole range of primary, secondary and tertiary interventions we make. Part of that is looking at how you keep everybody safe, which will of course mean keeping them safe from kids who in a school setting or outside of a school setting aren't able, I suppose, to interact with those kids. That's one thing. I mean, the second thing is, how do you intensively work with those kids who have got perhaps generational trauma, who are perhaps not being in school, who perhaps come from a family life which hasn't made it easy for them, who perhaps have suffered a lot of racism in their life, who don't feel that they can connect with the system. And that is intensive work that I think is equally as important. So I wouldn't want to get into demonising those kids, and I wouldn't want to get into making them too much of a problem. I'd want to be unpacking the problems that have got them into that state. So there is two aspects, I think, to the point that you're making. One is how we keep everybody safe, which is absolutely fundamental, and then how we deal with some of the kids, and how we work closely with some of those kids who are, as you said, not at risk but causing risk.
Okay. I can see, but I can see we're going to have you back, Lib, because we've all got so many questions for you. It's a very interesting area. Assembly Member Duval, and can we pick up speed a little bit? Then Mike.
How do you communicate the successes? Because you put some impressive stats to us this morning. I'm finding it hard to see where I've seen those in a press release or whatever. Why are you a shrinking violet, and why are we not seeing more of those? Not, no doubt there are some bits you want to improve on or whatever, but they're pretty impressive for the first phase, because it's still early days in the sense of VRU and where it needs to be, of trying to get ahead of the curve in terms of dealing with crime. So what is it? Why am I missing this? Am I not looking in the right places, or why are you making it hard for me?
OK, well, I'm sorry you're making it hard for you. And first of all, I've never been called a shrinking violet before, so that's a new one for me. But yeah, I mean, we have a big social media presence. We put out a lot to young people, mainly through young people doing Instagram accounts. We put out a lot to local authorities and our partners. And obviously we try where we can to get press attention to some of the programmes. Last week we were in a Prue talking about the expansion of the programme. I'm hoping at some point we'll be able to do something on robbery and the questions that the Chair started with, to look at the impact of that when it's a bit more mature. So I think there is a more specific point that I should probably address, which is, we should, as a unit, write to you as committee members, offer you the opportunity to go on visits and to see some of the work that I've talked about in action. We've certainly had a lot of new London MPs come forward and take up that opportunity, and they've all been, variously impressed by, where they've gone. And I think actually I'm doing a disservice to your colleague sitting next to you, Marina, because you have been to one of the My Ends project in Lambeth, and I think you would agree with Helen Hayes, who's the MP there, that it's been a really, really good local neighbourhood community initiative. So yeah, we can certainly, we can certainly take you to programmes, and we can certainly provide you more regularly with that information.
Okay, well done, and looking forward to more, to be honest, because if ever there's an area that needs more, this is one that does. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so very quickly then, in what ways has the VRU approach to commissioning developed over the past 5 years? What's working well, and where do you believe improvements can be made or could be made?
Do you mean specifically about the commissioning process itself rather than the programmes?
Yeah, generally.
Yeah, OK. So I think we were set up to do things a bit differently, and that was very much the mandate from the Mayor when we started, with a particular emphasis on how we communicated and worked alongside communities and young people. And I think the things that have worked is our exemplar Young People's Action Group. Some of the members of the committee were able to, benefit, I think, from their wisdom but at a previous meeting. But we have engaged them in not only understanding the gaps as they perceive them, and obviously that needs to be backed up by data, but I think it's really important when we're talking about young people that we actually involve young people in the conversation, because we're all old and we're quite far away from that. So it's really important that we learn from their experience. That has been helpful. They have helped us evaluate some of the programmes, and they have also been party when there's been some kind of competitive bidding. They've also been party to that. I think that's something we've got right. We have also worked very closely with professionals on the front line. So again, we didn't want to say, some of us in the team have got youth work experience, others haven't. We didn't want to presume what we thought was working. We set up a youth practitioners group, and they again have kept us all from across all London, different organisations, but all absolutely working with young people. What do they want? They wanted a youth training programme, youth worker training programme, been very deprofessionalised over the last 10 years, and so we have now reached, or in the process of reaching 500 youth workers across London, which is looking at kind of violence in that setting. That's another good example, I think, of listening to people. And then I suppose for me, probably the best example of our commissioning has been the My Ends programme, which I've just referred to on several occasions. It is award-winning, but it's award-winning from the MJ because it takes a fundamentally different approach to commissioning. What we've heard from community groups and what we know, many of us from our previous professional experience, is small organisations in a small area competing for a small pot of money against each other doesn't do very much to actually provide cohesiveness and an overall approach to tackling something as particularly as deep-seated as violence. So rather than do that, we encouraged groups to come together as a consortia for them to tell us what the problems were in their neighbourhood, and what the challenges were, for us to supplement that with the data that was necessary, and then for us to support them in coming up with solutions. And that has been transformational in the way that we have commissioned that programme. I know it's influenced MOPAC, I know it's influenced other organisations across City Hall, but actually the impact I'm most interested in is what it's done at a local level. And that has meant that by doing it in that way, and by making sure that the local authority has to sign off the bid, which brings it in to ensuring it's part of producing the impact in the local area, we have seen programmes flourish. We've seen much better connection between organisations in a small area. We've got confidence of the confidence of those community groups, and we've got then a group of young people who feel part of a neighbourhood and feel pride in that neighbourhood and are able to thrive in a way we know we need them to if they're going to be impacted by violence. So those would be, for me, the core components have been keeping it real, making sure that the voice of the people you're trying to help is in the commissioning process, and making sure that when you're doing that evaluation, you're also involving them in it.
OK, so everyone can't be good and sometimes fail.
Yeah.
So in the process, how have you dealt with the commissioning process with partners that haven't quite hit the quality threshold that you want here at the centre, bearing in mind you're working with multiple partners?
OK, I'll give you two examples of that briefly.
Can we just have one example? We really are running out of time.
It's such a shame. My example then, I'll go back to My Ends because I've talked about how impressive that is. We had 8 consortia first off 3 years ago, and we've expanded that intensively to 11. But one of those 8, and I'm not going to name them because it's unfair, were failing in the first year. Really, there was a lot of trying to get community participation off the ground. There was a lot of community connection off the ground, but there was also obviously measures around how they were doing primary, secondary and tertiary interventions, and they were failing at that. So we convened a group with them initially. We talked to them through about the data they needed to be providing. We then also got the local authority involved, and we actually said we're not funding it again unless there is a complete transformation. We're not funding it for the 3rd year. As you can imagine, that caused a lot of consternation. It brought the key partners around the table, and now what we've seen is that My Ends programme, which did get into the second tranche of My Ends, really improving in terms of its outreach, managing to do that tertiary, which is at that high end of risk that Mr. Bailey or Lord Bailey was referring to, and we've seen a much improved programme. So again, not that kind of commissioning that's transactional that says, right, this is what we do, this is what we expect, you've not made it, let's get rid of you. A real understanding that sometimes communities are a bit more complicated, working at a voluntary and community sector is a bit more complicated, and our role in that is to support but get them to the desired outcome, and that would be the way we've done it.
Many years ago, at the establishment of your unit, we talked about evidence-based issues, and it does come across in terms of what you're saying to us, and it would be great to have a longer session with you that. But how do you maintain that and avoid the fads and fashions of people saying, hold on, we haven't quite got the evidence for this, but we think this would be really good, and try to push you off that direction. Do you know what I mean? How does that work?
I do. I mean,
Yeah.
okay, so I think you have a strategy. I think you have got to be very clear in terms of your purpose, and you've got to make sure that that purpose is shared by the partnerships across London that indeed we've got, with it with the police, but local authorities in particular, or health and education, where again we haven't spoken much about that work, but we've got really good connections with them. So I think you've got to have that kind of shared ambition, shared direction that then is shared with the team and makes sense to some of the community groups that you're working with. You've got to be quite resolute. I mean, there are times when people have constantly tap me up for money, and I have to say, no, I'm afraid we haven't either got that resource or that resource is going here. But I think you've got to stay, haven't you, true to the fact that you know certain things are working. I've given you some examples of some of those programmes. Those programmes are delivering every day for young people, and that's what we're in the business of, and that's what they're doing in terms of the stats around violence as well. It's really, really important. So, you know, I think you've got to contextualise it in that way and make sure that you're providing something sort of longer term, and you're keeping your eye on the longer term as well as obviously responding to some of the short term. So I think those are personally the key ingredients. The only thing that perhaps slightly dents that argument, which I do think is important, is that you do have to have a little bit of kind of an eye to something that might be coming up as a new idea, because we don't know everything. Clearly, we're meant to be a learning organisation, and you do need an agility to be able to respond to crises. And indeed, we've got our critical incident fund when, unfortunately, an incident happens in a borough, and we're able to respond very quickly, and working with the Met Police and the local authority to put in the resource that's needed. But we've also got our innovation fund, or had until recently, where just small amounts of cash sometimes in a very local neighbourhood gives somebody the ability to be able to try something new, and then maybe we might learn from that. So yeah, that's the combination I would look for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly then, Assemblymember Roberts, on your supplementary.
Dear me. We've heard a lot about resources today and the impact that they have on commissioning of services. One of the things which have been struggled with authorities up and down the country is the impact of the rise of national insurance contributions and the knock-on effect that that's going to have on the ability to provide services, the cost thereof. What work has been done by the VRU, and what understanding do you have of how the increase in NICs is going to impact on the delivery of services across your remit?
This will be a brief answer because not very much, I'll be honest. We do have a charities network where we bring together about 15, 20 key players in London, and I'm sure that at the next meeting they will be looking at that. Previously, they've looked at the kind of cost of living and the impact of that on organisations. But yeah, we will have to factor that in, because so much of our work is obviously with voluntary and community sector, as we've talked about, and any extra sort of challenge to them is going to actually result in a challenge to us. So I appreciate the point you're making, but I haven't really, unfortunately, got much more information to give you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
How does the VRU evaluate the report on value for money for the services that you've commissioned? So you've commissioned a service. How do you then go back and think on a purely financial terms that this money's have an impact?
We're starting, as we're getting more sophisticated, to building cost-benefit analysis to some of our programmes, and we're going to see the first of that published at the beginning of next year, which is for the custody. I think it's actually specifically for Divert, actually. So we'll be able to share that with the panel. But obviously our other value for money is critically looking at how it's reaching KPIs and what it's doing in terms of the picture of violence, and that's our biggest test, I suppose, in terms of value for money. And we've kind of gone through the KPIs that I think we're using, and we've obviously said that's available, and we've obviously looked at that in the context of violence, either in a particular neighbourhood or a particular borough or London-wide. So those would be the tests I would use for value for money.
Do you have a mechanism to review your KPIs at any point, just generally?
Yeah, we try to be quite an agile organisation. I mean, it's a bit unfair, isn't it, if you set up a kind of contract with someone to suddenly change the measures of success midstream.
No, I don't mean you change for them. I mean for yourself. So you've started a project, you've given KPIs, you will commission a similar project maybe 2-3 years down the line. Do you have a mechanism to look at maybe?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm...
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a good example of that, which was the MyEnds programme, 3 years, where we had some KPIs which was more around some of the community building, the capacity, number of organisations working together, how harmonious they're working together. What we didn't have enough of, and has been amended in the second iteration of the programme, is the emphasis on tertiary support, so we built those in. So that was a good learning from us in one context into another. We heard from custody workers, for example, youth workers in custody suites, that what they didn't feel that we were providing enough of and therefore weren't measuring enough was kind of mental health. So we built that in as well.
Let's just talk about MyEnds because it comes up a lot. I've been there 3 times. MyEnds is good in and of itself, but why is there any other projects like MyEnds? Have you commissioned it anywhere else? Why is it MyEnds universal?
Well, sorry, did you say why isn't it universal?
Yeah.
Well, it has been expanded a lot. I mean, that was the first thing that the Mayor did, and it was indeed his first visit on his new administration, was to announce 14.5 million for the next 2 years around MyEnds. And that meant that we were able to extend from 8 neighbourhood places in the first 3 years to intensively working in 11, where it's community-led. But added, and importantly added to that, was that those boroughs that didn't have a MyEnds were also able to benefit from extra funding to look at a very specific area in their neighbourhood, with the stipulation that they obviously work closely with the community. So each of the boroughs has something that is a MyEnds programme. But my ambition absolutely would be higher than that. My ambition would be that we had community-led neighbourhood programmes in each of, not necessarily the 32 boroughs, but where we know most of the problems are across London. So that has been expanded.
Okay. Let me come back to this. When there's a live performance dashboard for VRU staff, when was it initiated, and what impact are they having, these live dashboards?
Well, the live dashboards are a really accessible way for us to be able to see who we're helping, where we're helping them, how it relates to the KPI, how it relates to the money that we're investing, and gives you, for somebody like me who doesn't particularly like reading figures on a straight piece of paper but likes to see it visually come to life, it's excellent. And I'm really, it's a real shame that we can't share that because of the technical hitches, because I think you would. Yeah, I think you get a lot from it.
Is the aim to share it?
Oh, totally, yeah. The aim has been to put that on, publicly, because I think it gives a transparency to the work and actually answers, Len's point earlier on, which is, people need to know more and more about what works, what impacts it's having, and the range of activities that are being supported by the London Mayor, across the capital to reduce violence and in support of young people. So yes, absolutely. I'm very frustrated that having got this snazzy, accessible, really good interactive dashboard, that we can't actually publish it at the moment, but hopefully that will happen soon.
I think, Chair, let's come back to you.
Assembly Member Roberts. Can you put your microphone on? We're all doing this today.
Yeah. It's one of those days. The latest VRU quarterly report stated that 7 KPIs are in development. When do you expect the work to be completed?
Well, they will be before we start, sorry. I'm doing it now. Just going to say, very soon. I mean, I can give you a specific date, but we're not going to start programmes without having KPIs in place.
Do you think maybe we can have a KPI for the KPIs?
A KPI for KPIs?
For delivery of the same?
I don't think there's a problem there, but we can give you that detail, and indeed it's accessible anyway through the website.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Best.
Thanks. Morning, Liv. What does the VRU's capacity building support for delivery partners involve?
Okay, so one of the things that it's involved, which is relevant, I suppose, to the last couple of contributions, is how you collect data and what kind of data that we need. So one of the things that we found, again, in the first part of the the Mayans programme is that you have community consortia who are doing valuable work, but either haven't got the capacity or indeed haven't got the knowledge and the wherewithal to know how to produce the stats that we need to be able to evidence impact, either positive or negative. And so there was a lot of sessions from our research and evaluation team where they would put on half days for those organisations so that they were clear about what they needed to be collecting. So that would be one thing. I know that Patrick Green, who I'm sure you all know, went recently to talk to some of the Mayans groups about how you use what you are doing to influence policy and how you engage with people. We've also done work. The central team of Mayans has gone out and helped with some of those organisations to do much more youth engagement, and has helped them to sort of drawing on our Young People's Action Group and the way we've set that up. They've spoken to them about how you embed, you know, a young person's voice and experience rather than just doing it in a very kind of tokenistic kind of way. So a whole range of things. It's very dependent for us on what is being articulated as a challenge, either to community groups or from young people, and us then bringing in the relevant kind of experts or setting up the relevant discussion. But those are 3 examples of the kind of capacity building that we've done for community groups.
And is there evidence to suggest that using that's helped groups to go on to get other grant funding and help them in that way?
Yeah, there is. There's a fantastic example, actually. I had the privilege last week of meeting the Belfast-based guy who heads up Active Communities Network, and he'd come over, not to see me, I hasten to add, but that was part of his schedule, to really draw from what Southwark Active Communities Network had been doing. Again, part of Mayans, because not only had they managed to secure this funding, but they've gone on to get National Lottery funding, and they've gone on to be a really clear strategic partner of the council. And as a result of that, they're exploring with the council setting up of a physical building where they can operate from. So they, as an organisation, have benefited from mayoral funding, which has enabled them to do their work more effectively, which has then in turn enabled them to go out and get additional funding, which has enabled them to have a far greater reach than just that first part of neighbourhood. And the key thing then was he was coming over because that's exactly the approach he was hoping to take in Northern Ireland. But again, you sort of begin to see, I suppose, the transfer of knowledge and skills and potentially funding. So I think that's probably illustrates the point most well.
I think to come back to the point Assembly Member Deval was making earlier, it's part of that. That information would be really important in the not the shrinking violet that you are apparently, is to show the financial benefit of, say, if there's been this funding through the mayor's pot, then what has that actually generated financially for London in terms of further grant funding? Yeah,
it was funny because that came up at, well, not funny, but I mean, that's exactly the point that came up actually at that meeting last week, that if you get an opportunity to speak to either Ollie or Sinead, who head up that organisation, they speak very, very persuasively about how that initial money has led them, and the programme has led them into all sorts of different spheres of influence and different kind of ability to attract money, and how they were going to start thinking about quantifying that. Writing it down and being able to share it. So when we've got that piece, we're definitely very happy to share that if someone could take a note, because even us working for the Mayor of London, and obviously him being the kind of key elected official for the whole of the capital, there is still limitations on what you can do, and therefore actually sort of ensuring that projects have a life of their own and can go on to influence other parts of either London or indeed other groups of people or attract more funding seems to me to be part of our role. It's acting as a catalyst and a convener and a connector as much as it is always just doing some of the delivery and doing some of the funding. So, yeah, very happy to share that with you.
Thanks. And moving on to working with the Home Office, how are you working with Home Office to kind of enhance analytical skills and improve on that ability to demonstrate value for money? So,
I mean, we enjoyed a good relationship with the Home Office well, we have enjoyed a good relationship with the Home Office under both of the governments. Obviously, with the previous administration, the Home Office were always looking to the 3 measures by which they assessed our effectiveness, which we've referred to today, which is, homicide, which is reduction in robbery, personal robbery, and reduction in injuries for under 25s. So a lot of the conversation was around that, but also a lot of the conversation was around, how we as one VRU, obviously the first VRU, were able to connect with the other 19 across the country and sharing practice. At the moment, we are in discussions around the government's ambition to have prevention partnerships and what they can learn from a London Violence Reduction Unit and how that looks for the rest of the country. And so that's a Home Office conversation, and my colleagues is part of a working group that's exploring that. And we are also, again, in discussion around Young Futures, which is something that the new government has billed as one of their kind of answers to really working with kids at risk. And again, drawing on the work that we've done to help to shape that. And at the moment, that's being led by the DFE. So we work very closely generally with the Department for Education, and specifically, we've been involved in conversations around that as well.
Thanks. I think one of the things that I think this committee has done is being supportive of the VRU in principle, always. But the stark reality is London is more violent now. There's over £100 million worth of funding now into the VRU. But Londoners, will be looking at the statistics of violent crime and seeing that they're on the rise. They'll also be comparing, the funding you get to the fact that that's 600, 700 police officers. So is that something you accept, that violence in London is now growing, and that the job to kind of to affirm why you're here is more important? I mean, how do you sell that London is getting more violent, but the Violence Reduction Unit's taking this funding, and on the face of it, doesn't look like there's an improvement?
I mean, first of all, I would do, as I've previously said, I would contextualise the impact of the Violence Reduction Unit over the violence figures for the last 5 years. But obviously, I would acknowledge that, we have got really serious challenges in London, and, any homicide is one too many, and that we've got a lot of communities, in a lot of despair, and our role can only be to try and help in that context. More generally, I think, it speaks to the importance of prevention. I mean, we know that when we were first set up, £3 billion is spent on the cost of violence, by all the statutory agencies. And that's a financial figure. We all know, because we've all been in positions before, we've had conversations with people who've lost someone, the emotional impact is much more intense than that. And, it's always difficult talking about financial figures when you're talking about that kind of personal pain. But that's the road we're going down at the moment. And we can map out the kind of kids, who we think could get caught up in violence. And it's about their life chances, about their life experiences, and how we intervene at those transition moments, how we think about the system that is around them and so often doesn't actually take account of their experience, and how the system also needs to change. So for me, there is a financial saving around investing in prevention that often isn't contextualised in the way that it should be, as opposed to the $3 billion. But there is obvious evidence as to how we can prevent that from happening, that we have a duty to fund. And when I have conversations with people, they don't see it as a either or. They don't see here's prevention over here, and if we're not putting in prevention, we put in enforcement. I find people are much more attuned to the realities that we're living in London, and that they know that you've got to have both. Of course we need more police officers, and of course enforcement is part of the problem, but we're not going to enforce our way out of violence unless we start taking prevention seriously. And that's about investment, that's about partnership working, that's about listening to young people, it's about thinking what is having impact, as we've explored today. And I'd also add to that, I think that, Sir Mark is very attuned to that as well. I mean, one of his, 6 months ago, I think, he was obviously, went in very strongly on the fact that he felt the police were sometimes picking up a mental health role that he didn't think it was appropriate for them to be picking up. There is a policing response here, and they are a key absolute key partner clearly of driving down violence, but there is a whole load of other agencies that play a part in a preventative role that I think we need to be empowering, working with and investing in, and that is education, that is health, and that
No, I
is
agree. I've
authorities.
literally come from this background, right? I'm not trying to have but I think you need to be attuned to the fact that London is getting more violent. People are more worried to get their phone out on the street. People are more worried to lock their bikes up. This is the real danger in real time that people are worried about. And when we're putting lots of money into the VRU and people see London getting more and more violent, more and more robberies, that argument isn't going to work unless it's got something really good behind it. And I think, as Assemblymember de Waal said earlier, it just doesn't feel like we're quite there. But in the interest of time, I will come up, but I couldn't not mention to you, Liv, about the cadets. And please, if you could have any influence on how important the cadet programme is for the Commissioner, please do. Thanks.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, Lib. Caroline Russell.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the report that this committee published last March, which is Preventing Violence and Protecting Young People. And was very glad to see that one of our recommendations, recommendation 2 about the Met prioritising safeguarding children and young people, was reflected in the Children and Young People strategy that was published in September. But I wanted to, say that we have not yet received a response either from the Mayor or the VRU to our findings and recommendations. So if we can nudge you for that. And hopefully we can get a response maybe by the end of the year. But also I wanted to just pick up on our recommendation 7, because it relates to some of the stuff that we've been talking about this morning. So we said that the VRU should provide a forum for Met officers, schools and youth practitioners to come together to explore how they can strengthen the support that they're providing to children and young people impacted by violence. And I just wondered whether you had anything to say on that recommendation.
Okay, first of all, can I apologise then, because I'm looking at answers to recommendation. I don't know where that has gone. I mean, we did this so long ago that I wanted it in the briefing to make sure that I was totally au fait with the recommendation. So I really, from our point of view, that has been signed off quite some time ago. So I will check where that is in the system. Apologies. And so on to your point of number 7, and the key role around schools. I am heading down to Croydon now because one of the things through the inclusion charter that we've done is bring together boroughs looking at inclusion in schools. So looking at that whole point about how you get kids into school, given what we've already referred to, how we keep them in school, what does that look like? And we know what it looks like in terms of the research that we've drawn from 4,000 young people across London. Looks like, how do they express their belonging? How do they express their identity? How do they feel safe? So boroughs are attuned to that. 28 of them are signed up to the charter, and one of the working groups, we've got several best practice sessions, one of which is in Croydon today, and several boroughs that have set up working groups. That seems to me to be the template on which we then graft in conversation around police officers in schools, and that is really taken off in the last 10 months since we launched the Inclusion Charter. So I'd say we are very embedded now in schools, and we're very embedded in local authorities. We haven't yet added in the conversation about police officers, but we certainly could do.
That's really reassuring to hear. And can I just double check? Are you also working with academised schools or just with the borough schools?
So we've had a couple of academies that have signed up to the charter, Oasis notably. We're also working very closely with ARC, but we have got leads with the 4 main other academy chains as well, which haven't yet signed up properly to the charter, but we are working with them, and we know that is an important part of making sure that we've got not only a London vision for inclusion across education, but we've got it as a reality.
Yeah, I think there is some concern about exclusions and exclusion rates at academies. So
yeah, I mean, what we can also do as this work progresses, we can start pinpointing which schools have got problems with exclusion, and when we've got the borough behind that, and we've also got a London-wide movement, it makes it an easier conversation to have, because this is an alternative.
Thank you. Now, I was meant to be asking also what's next for the VRU, but I think possibly we've come to the 11 o'clock moment. So I'm going to pause on that.
Yes, and I promised I would get you out of here by 11. So I would like to thank you, Liv Peck, for attending. There are so many more questions that we want to ask, and you're giving us very full answers. And I'm sorry I've had to cut you off, but I promised to get you out by 11. So thank you for attending this morning and for answering our questions. We're going to adjourn now for 5 minutes before starting the second part of today's meeting. So 11:05, we will be back in here for the next section.
Thank you very much. Very happy to send round information and send visit opportunities. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. I now welcome our second guest, Will Balakrishnan, Director of Commissioning and Partnerships, Mayor Office for Policing and Crime, known as MOPAC. So it's still morning, isn't it? Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for attending, and especially at such short notice, because, as you know, we were going to be discussing the police and crime plan this morning. So, do you know what's happened to the police and crime plan?
I mean, I do. Obviously, the committee saw the Deputy Mayor for a confirmation hearing not too long ago. That obviously happened at, that changeover happened at quite a crucial point in the development of the police and crime plan. So I think it's right that the new Deputy Mayor spent a bit of time with it and made sure that, yes, it was a document that she wants to lead, particularly MOPAC, but also the partnership over the next few years.
Now, I know all that, Will. As you know, I know that. And as the committee knows all that, the actual question was, where is it? What's happened to it? When will it be printed?
Soon, I think, is the honest answer. It will be out for consultation before Christmas. I think a timescale was given at the last PCC, and as I understand it, we're going to meet that timescale. Well,
no particular timescale has been given. Soon, it can be stretched beyond all belief. When we asked for the estate strategy for the police, that soon has now been about 3 or 4 years. So soon doesn't give me any encouragement. You also have to speak to us all about the police and crime plan. It's got to go out to consultation. We're running very, very short on time, and we need time to look at it all, digest it, and then ask questions. So can you give us a date? You've obviously seen it. How near to the end is it? Because we were told we could comfortably have it by this meeting.
Well, unfortunately, it isn't entirely in my gift. If it was in my gift, Assembly Member,
I'd have it now, wouldn't I?
I would. No, I mean, if it was in my gift, I would give you a date I could hold myself to. But given it isn't in my gift, I don't think on this occasion I'd like to give you a definitive date.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we can but try, because we're all chomping at the bit to read this police and crime plan. And of course, where you're going to be spending money on depends on the priorities in the police and crime plan. So it being held up isn't helpful to any of us, is it really?
It isn't, but I think...
That's fine. No is the answer, so that'll do. Thank you. Shall I start asking you questions you want to be asked on? Yes.
That'd be nice, but I'm happy to help the committee in any way I can, you know.
Well, just bring us a police and crime plan. OK, so what areas has MOPAC prioritised in its commissioning of services over the past 3 years?
Thanks. I mean, I wonder if it might be helpful just to talk a bit about, first of all, what I think that word commissioning means, and then the strategies which we commission against, how much money we spend, and then, you know, broadly I can talk about some of the impact that those big things have had. Would that be helpful?
Only if you're brief, because there's a wonderful document here I have read from cover to cover twice.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'm sure my colleagues have also read this, and we do understand what commissioning is. But if you want to give a very, very short...
I'll be very brief then. I'll be very brief.
For anybody watching, I assure you we understand commissioning. But
no, good,
yes,
great, thank you. Just because a lot of people, I think, confuse commissioning with sort of contracting or tendering, and that's absolutely not what we do. So what we think of commissioning about is really all resources that we might have available to us. Might be money, might be funding, but also it's time, it's the brilliant convening power of the mayor, it's, it's volunteering resources, everything that's in the system. And we try and think about, well, what's the best way to use that resource to get the biggest outcome we can for Londoners? And we do that at MOPAC through a really simple lens that I really like, because I think it makes it clear. And it's the question I ask, and I encourage everyone to ask when they see a piece of commissioning work. The first question is it obvious that the people doing this work understand what life is like now and how it's changing now? So is it getting more complex? Is there more need, less need? Is the complexity changing? I think that's really important, because we've got to understand our problem, and it's got to be a mix. It's got to be a mix of numbers. We read out some stats earlier about crime rates in London, but we've all, which is absolutely important. We've also got to understand, well, what are the stories behind that? What are the lived experiences? How are Londoners experiencing these things? So that then allows us to say, well, what should life look like in the future? Sometimes we call that outcomes frameworks or something quite technical. But I actually think often the work we do, particularly in when we're looking at big systems, the more we can get a kind of consensus on this is where we're going to go, this is what it's going to feel like, this is, you know, the space we're going to occupy in some years' time, I think that's really good at galvanising things and helps us make a big change and answer the last question, which is how might things change if we do things differently? That's the key question for me. So, you know, your whatever commission you then have should talk to that. What will the change be? How will this make things different and better? So that's what we try and do at MOPAC around commissioning. Our key outcomes, so the key sort of, the bit of that, well, what should life look like? Where is that defined? Well, it's in a number of strategies. Oh, sorry, am I going on?
No, it's more that you're teaching grandmother to suck eggs here.
I'm sorry.
But so,
all right, so we've got more than one strategy, is all I wanted to say.
We've got some questions about what you're doing.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So it would be, so we must get to those.
Okay, so what's most helpful? I've outlined in the thing I sent round some of the sort of big impacts that I think we've had where our priorities have been. I think we've now got some evaluations which tell us, particularly in terms of reducing violence, we're now in a place where I think we have the highest confidence about a couple of services that I've mentioned, integrated offender management and GPS, and there's sort of now really the most cast iron evaluations for those. I think service design, we've undertaken some massive service design over the last mayoralty, really transforming the way victims are going to receive services through our new ecosystem model, thinking about the way particularly sexual violence survivors are going to have a brand new model for their support. I'm really proud of those two brilliant bits of service design, as well as for those young people who are caught up in some of the most serious violence and exploitation, in particularly around serious group offending, which you might call gangs. And I'm really proud of those. Innovation, MOPAC's unique, really, in the criminal justice system in our ability to innovate and systems leadership.
Right. Okay. Okay, just something I'll pick up from something you've said there. You say victims receive services that really need it, and since you're looking at who needs it, what are you doing to help shopkeepers that are constantly facing armed robbers, or even just, you know, people coming into their shops, emptying the shelves? What work is happening to help those shopkeepers? Because it's gone up something like 82%, hasn't it?
Sure, it has. So, I mean, victims of crime at the moment have to choose whether they want to access victim support services or not. So you don't automatically get contacted by victim support or are made an offer. It's a slightly strange thing. You have to opt in. So the front door to that is our colleagues in the Met Police Service, and we've spoken a bit before, I think, about New Met for London, and within that, their commitment to victim services. But the most important thing for us at the moment, I think, for those shopkeepers is that they are being properly signposted to the support that's available, because I know from the satisfaction figures that we have from our existing provider and for the new one, that when people get into the service, they really like it. But sometimes you might want support after the event. So at the actual point of crime, you're like, no, I just want something done about it. Later on, you might say, well, I want, actually, I would like some victim support services. So, yeah, we've invested a lot over the last year in terms of a much better portal, a much better front door with our provider victim support. It's going to get even better in the new model, so that if you want the support later, there is a clear way in, you understand how to do it, and crucially, you've got choice. So you can choose which way you want to receive that support. But once you get it, the satisfaction is very high.
Right. That doesn't really answer my question. I haven't even asked my proper first question yet. That doesn't really... Are you going out to help 82% of business robbery? It's gone up by 82.5%, actually, percent. That is drastic. So exactly what have you put in to help all of those people?
So we have so those people will receive the same victim support programme that are sort of our universal service.
So it's not tailored to these poor businesses, because it is quite different.
Tailored to, I mean, once they get into the service, they're individual victims. So the way people... we know quite a lot about victimisation. We know quite a lot about
So all
how to
victims are the
respond to it.
same? Is that what you're saying?
No, but what I'm saying is the type of victimisation you receive, often the type of crime for which you are a victim, doesn't necessarily relate to the type of support that would best help you. One, cope and recover from that. Two, reduce your chances of re-victimisation. Or three, help you stay in a criminal justice process.
Let's both concentrate on this. So I'm a shopkeeper. 82.5% of that crime has gone up, businesses being stolen from. We have spoken as councillors and as assembly members to very many business owners that are really suffering greatly from this. Now, millions go into victim support, quite rightfully. Exactly what tailored thing have you put in? Because it's gone up so much in the last year or two. And we've listened to all your spiel at the beginning, and it's how it's all encompassing and how wonderful. Looking at those horrific figures of 82.5% increase in business robbery, exactly what's MOPAC doing about those poor people that are suffering that particular crime?
So I'm afraid I might not. I'm really sorry. I don't actually agree with the premise of the question. So
okay.
It isn't the fact
question.
you're a shopkeeper,
I'm just relating to the 82.5%.
I understand that. I understand retail crime has gone up, and I understand that there are more shopkeepers and more people who work in retail who have become victims of crime. I understand that. I think the premise that therefore it is the fact I'm a shopkeeper, or it is the fact that I work in retail, is most relevant to the support that I receive. That probably isn't quite how we seek to design sports services. So the sort of needs a person might have, and how we might then best help them cope and recover from the crime, and best help them not be a victim again, and best help them stay in a criminal justice process, are probably less related to them being a shopkeeper and more related to their individual personal needs. So, as with all victims of crime, they will have an assessment about those needs when they take up the offer of support. And the offer of support is there, and it's big. So I don't think sort of being a shopkeeper is the issue. I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding.
No, I don't. I'd love you to tell that to a shopkeeper, quite frankly. I'd love you to explain that to a shopkeeper.
With the greatest respect.
You and I are never going to agree on this. I feel for those people that are suffering dreadful losses. I've seen Assembly Member Roberts. Do you want to come in before I start asking questions?
Thank you. Yes, it's on the specific point of the victim support services, and you just said that you design those services yourself. You also said that it was strange that people have to opt in. Why don't you design a better service where people don't have to opt in?
Unfortunately, I'm not the legislator. So I'm a commissioner, I'm a service designer. So
what representations have you made for a better service?
A terrific amount. So we work very closely with, London's really fortunate that we have a victims commissioner, Claire Waxman, and our officers work really closely together to absolutely try and change the system, to absolutely try and stand up for victims, and to absolutely try and improve the services around them. I think that's actually quite a tricky question than it sounds, doesn't it? Because not everybody in the aftermath of the crime would necessarily want someone who isn't the police contacting them. So I do understand the premise. And I do understand that for some people, this is back to where I was saying one really needs to understand experience and understand what individual needs are. So it's not really the fact I'm a victim of a crime doesn't change how I feel about other things. I don't have a single issue life. So I do understand why it's not opt-in. So actually, why it is opt-in. So I probably actually wouldn't seek to change that. What I would seek to change is that the way I would like more personally, and this we are working on, is if at the beginning I want the police to be much clearer about something called the Victims Code of Practice and your rights within it. And the police are doing a lot better. They now have a little QR code. They give something called a victim information leaflet that explains what my rights are as a victim. I think that's a great example of where we've changed the system through MOPAC, through our service design, and through what Claire's office has done. So I think that's brilliant. I think where we've got a little bit further to go is if I've forgotten that leaflet or if I've lost that QR code, how easy is it for me to get back into the victim support system? And that's where I think we are trying to improve. And that's where this idea of an ecosystem is important. One of the reasons why people might not wish to, we know that trust and confidence in public institutions, all of them, not just the Met, is falling. We know that trust and confidence in the criminal justice system is falling. So I think for a lot of people, the reason they might not want that service, particularly, unfortunately, if you've been a victim of a rape or serious sexual offence, is that trust issue. So the reason this ecosystem is really important is it's not about victim support and the big blanket. It's about the organisations in my community who I might feel safer to go to and speak to. Do they know how then they can get people back into the system for the specialist support? Because that's probably more causal, isn't it? My feelings of trust, the feelings that my needs are being met, to me coping and recovering, to me staying in the criminal justice system, which is what we really want. Victim attrition is far too high. Does that answer the question?
To an extent, but we've seen that there's been huge steps forward in terms of organ donation, in terms of people having to physically opt out of the system. And I'm just wondering whether it's possible that, you know, if you're the victim of crime, your immediate thought might not be, oh, I need support, I need help, and that might come at some time later in the future. And the idea of having an opt-out system rather than an opt-in, whilst recognising the specifics, individual circumstances that you just said, I think that might be a better way forward, because people might not, at the time, recognise that they need the support. I appreciate it's a big cost.
I think it's a really,
big resource drain.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think it depends what. So often with these things, we're thinking about. We know we've got these two outcomes. We know we want people to cope and recover from victimisation, and we know that that will help with their re-victimisation. We know that will help with all sorts of other things in their lives. We also want people to stay in the criminal justice system, and as I said, victim and witness attrition is unfortunately is too high at the moment. So I think to your point, it'd be interesting to have that debate and conversation, wouldn't it, about which outcome is best supported by an opt-in? Because I think just thinking about it literally, probably more people might stay in the criminal justice system. But would that help them cope and recover from their victimisation more or better? You know, would me being called or texted or emailed by a victim support organisation, you know, a month after my crime, maybe I just wanted to forget about it. I genuinely don't know, but I think it's a great debate.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you. Just listening to the debate you had actually come from a different perspective than A.M. Roberts. I could see a situation. I wouldn't want to talk to any of you, actually. But the important thing is, how easy is this system to access at all, and specifically after the case?
So I think it's really easy to get in the front door. So I think Victim Support is one of the only organisations till recently that has a telephone number on their website. I mean, that's pretty incredible in 2024, isn't it? My bank certainly disguises their credit card, their telephone number. You know, they want you to go through every other channel possible before you make a call. So I think it's really easy to get into the front door. There is an issue, and I want to be really open about it, you know, which is the criminal justice system, unfortunately, has been, you know, is in a position where capacity has been exceeded in almost every corner of it. What that means is that people are staying in the criminal justice system for longer than ever. So if I'm a victim of crime and I am seeking I am part of a criminal justice journey, you know, I'm going to be in the system twice, 3, 4, 5 times as long as I would have been 10 years ago. So that is putting incredible pressure on particularly the specialist support services. So the specialist services, if unfortunately I've been a victim of a rape or serious sexual offence, or if I'm a victim of domestic abuse, or if I've been unfortunately experienced homicide, you know, which is a national service, but we work closely with. So it's very easy to get in the front door. It's very easy to access, you know, our core service. But as it gets more and more complex, I'm afraid you know, at the moment it is getting more difficult. That's why this redesign work we've done is so important. We're not solving the problem, Assembly Member Bailey. I wish I could tell you that, you know, my redesign has made it that every single person that needs support can get it. I think the reality is that unfortunately that isn't the case.
The other thing is as well, please don't rename gang activity. It is the most annoying thing in the world when professionals rename things to make them professional and to exclude other people from the conversation. Gang activity is gang activity because that's how people understand it. Saying it's mass offending, etc., is actually nonsense. Thank you, Chair.
Right. MOPAC previously told this committee that it completes thorough evaluations of services and that these were available on its website. unfortunately, it appears as though these pages are no longer live. So why is that?
I wasn't aware that was the case. I have links to several here. I'm happy to share with the committee's researchers afterwards. There's a page called MOPAT Research. On there are all kinds of things, not about some of our systems research, some of our project evaluations, some of our program evaluations. Sorry, I was looking at some of them last night, so I do know that exists. Sorry.
Which one were we looking at that we couldn't?
You can send it afterwards.
If you send the link, yeah. That's supposed. I know we've moved to a new website recently. Now, as part of move over to TfL. As you know, MOPAT's quite a small organisation, so we don't host our own. We don't host our own tech. We are obliged to others.
Okay, we'll look into that one. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Will.
Morning.
How is MOPAC ensuring that it's commissioning now on a longer-term basis and avoiding short-term funding application processes that some would see as burdensome?
Yeah, good question. So I've been at MOPAT now for just over 4 years, and I'm really proud in that time that we've had barely any short-term funding, because I just don't think it works. And I don't think it's really respectful of the market either. We're not in a world where we're buying paper cups. We're dealing with social outcomes, and we're dealing with lots of organisations who are incredibly committed to what they're doing and need our support to grow, need our support to be sustainable. So we always seek to commission for the longest viable time. Now, if it's we commission about £90 million worth of services every year. Not all of that is mayoral money. A lot of that money is from the Ministry of Justice or from the Home Office or from NHS. I'm quite good at getting NHS money somehow. Don't tell them that. But sometimes it isn't entirely in our gift. So we always commission for the longest we can. So, for example, take something like LCPF or Safer Neighbourhood Boards. We're just about to publish the decisions on those. We'll do those for the whole political term, because we want people to have certainty, and the whole political term feels like the right amount of time. For something like where we've got sort of core mayoral funding, like our new violence and exploitation service, we've done that because it's quite innovative. We've done it for 3 years plus the option for 2 more. That feels about right to me. For something like the Ministry of Justice victims funding, where we know what we call our core grant, where it might go up, it might go down, but we think we're always going to get it, we've gone for 4 years with a 2-year extension for all of those partners. But for something like Home Office DA perpetrator funding, I'm really proud of that innovation. We had the Minister out there on Monday as part of 60 Days of Activism. We were talking about the massive innovation in DA perpetrator programmes. That is only 1 year funding from government that rolls over every year. So we can only commission that for a year. What we do, though, what is a standard is we always give providers 6 months' notice about what our intentions are, minimum. So if that's any funding that I feel I have sort of relatively direct control over through the Deputy Mayor, that's a requirement. I always meet that standard. Where I don't, so for example, just to talk to that perpetrator funding, I know there's conversations still going on inside the Home Office about how to do that. I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to meet that standard. But what I do is keep them in constant conversation with providers, because that funding uncertainty we know is very unsettling. They lose staff, they can't recruit, they close caseloads. So, yeah, I spend a lot of my personal discretionary effort where we can't do that in really talking to providers and trying to support them.
Thank you. Have you got plans to evaluate and update the formula that you use to allocate funding to the boroughs through the London Crime Prevention Fund?
So, yeah, the Deputy Mayor has recently written to all the boroughs to say that we're not going to reduce the amount that is available for the London Crime Prevention Fund. So it's going to stay at 13.1 million of MOPAT money plus 1.6, and then lots of Home Office money through the VRU scheme. We haven't changed the formula. So we're using the same formula, but we have rerun it. It hasn't led to big winners and losers. But equally, it hasn't led to boroughs that had smaller allocations suddenly getting larger ones. So it hasn't changed things dramatically. Yes. So, I mean, I can talk you through, if you like, what there's about 10 things from population to crime rates to all kinds of things.
Well, could you just tell us what that... You've answered yes, so what does it actually involve? What does the work involve?
The formula. So there are 10 areas we look at. 14 factors. So the 14 factors in the funding formula include need, so deprivation factors, demand factors like crime volumes, and we sort of compute all those together and plug in 13.1 million, and out of the bottom comes some ranges. But yeah, nothing's changed by more than £100,000. As a result of rerunning those formulas. So boroughs aren't going to get anything dramatically different. We're going to write to boroughs with their final allocation shortly, so I don't want to sort of... I want them to be the first to know, if you know what I mean. I shouldn't really announce that in a committee.
OK, thank you. Chair, could I just spend a minute picking up on something that you said earlier? You referred to an ecosystem model. Could you just explain what you mean by that, please, just within a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the past, so we might, if you think about victim support, once upon a time there was just one massive contract that came out of government, and then what happened next is they said, well, actually, no, local areas might be better at thinking about what victim needs were. So actually it went to one kind of regional contract. Then people like us in London said, well, actually, there are groups of victims who have special needs, particular needs, or needs that are based on some other characteristic about themselves. So actually, those needs to be better met by specialist organisations. So we had a big model, and then we had some small specialist organisations. They might be by and fors, or they might be, dealing with particular needs. But of course, even then, that isn't the totality of resource available in the system, is it? That's just a resource that's being commissioned by one person. So I think there's something in an ecosystem about everyone just realising that there are lots of people commissioning services for these victims. And also, there are lots of people delivering services for these victims who aren't commissioned by anybody, who are voluntary sector organisations, or who have decided due to the, they're perhaps an organisation that supports, I don't know, a particular ethnic minority or a particular intersection of ethnic minority, ethnic minority and another protected characteristic, who have decided to provide some victim support. At the moment, those things are quite separate. So if I'm in the victim's journey, if I'm being worked by the big machine, it's not working in consort. So what we're seeking to do is change our relationship with our main providers and change our relationship with those smaller groups and try and bring in all that other resource. The way we have to do that, I think, is by changing our role from, a kind of contracting manager to what I call like a sort of system steward, where our job is to bring it all together. That, we hope, will bring a lot more real, genuine capacity into the system, make everything a bit more efficient, but crucially, in the case of victims, give them a smoother journey. The victim system has all these handoffs in, all these different agencies, depending on which stage of the process you're in. It's real old-school public sector failure. And we're really trying to do stuff about that. So I'm really hopeful the ecosystem is a really great step in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you. The last time this committee discussed commissioning was back in January 2020, and I think we wrote to you in March 2020. And so it's good to, one of our recommendations was about you commissioning for 3 to 4 years for funding allocations, which it sounds like you're meeting from what you've been saying. Now, we also recommended extending data collection beyond the lifespan of a project to properly assess any behavioural change. So just wondering if you're doing that and if that's working.
Yeah, really good question. I think that was just before I started, so I'm going to take credit for everything that happened after the committee the last minute, so all the improvement. We are. So I think this is really important, particularly seeing as the types of things that we deal with at MOPAT, things, particularly in the sort of reoffending space. Reoffending stats alone take 2 years really to be verifiable. So this more longitudinal way of looking at impact is really important. That's actually, there's a couple of published interventions. It's a shame there seems to be some web navigation issues, but I think I may have linked them in the paper. But there's 2 really good examples of that. One is the sort of IOM work, and 2 is the evaluation of something called London Gang Exit. So London Gang Exit which has got gang in it, Assemblymember Bailey. London Gang Exit, but it's the type of gang in which... No, I'm joking. London Gang Exit, which is one of the only programmes for people with that kind of complexity of need that can now show a reduction not only in re-victimisation but in a reduction in violent reoffending. That's only possible because of that longitudinal research. And, there's another cracking one in there on IOM, and that's why at the beginning I said, IOM is probably the programme the Mayoralty is involved with, which we can say today with certainty is having the biggest impact on today violence. Because we know it is. Sorry,
I'm not... IOM.
Oh, sorry, Integrated Offender Management.
OK, thank you.
So brilliant, it does what it says on the tin, doesn't it? We try and integrate the local authority, the police, probation, specialist services around an offender so they don't reoffend. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what, it works.
Well, good to hear that that's working. So then my final question on this timescale and commissioning piece is, are there any schemes that you're not commissioning where you think that with a longer time they might really make a difference, but it's not going to make an impact in the sort of shorter term, that first sort of 3 to 4 years, so things don't get commissioned? Are we losing out on potentially good ideas because of that, or are you pretty confident that's not the case?
So it's a good question. I mean, there are some points in the system where, I was trying to say earlier, MOPAC's probably the only bit of the criminal justice system at the moment, given where everything is, that can test, pilot, innovate, and then evaluate and create kind of this is what works. Mm-hmm. So by definition, some of those programmes will attract shorter-term funding, and actually the ones I would immediately think about were the ones that I was talking about that we were on DA perpetrator intervention. So those predominantly men who commit domestic abuse, we know very little actually in terms of evidence base about what changes their behaviours. Mm-hmm. And we also know that DA offenders tend to reoffend a lot. So we've got at the moment these 4 pilot programmes, one of which we know quite a lot about, which is called Drive, which is your classic kind of multi-agency. But there's 3 which are much more kind of based in the community, much closer with local authorities, much more about behaviour changes around the offender. There's this classic. I was at a presentation the other day, and they were sort of talking with social workers about, the change of narrative from why doesn't she leave him to why don't we get him out? Sounds really simple and sensible, doesn't it? This is a real kind of attitudinal issue, even for those of us. And I used to be a social care leader, so I get this. So to answer your question in a much shorter way, I think those programmes are slightly at risk. So we may not get the full. We may not be able to get the strongest evidence base as we would like, and yeah, that is a shame.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate if you could just keep the answers just slightly shorter. For your own time as well as anything else. Assemblymember Roberts.
Yes, sorry. It's just regarding the out of London boroughs and the formulas. In the past, out of London boroughs have expressed criticism about the formula. Have you taken this criticism on board? And what, if anything at all, has been done about it?
So we've in thinking about the London Crime Prevention Fund for this term, we did an awful lot of work on impact. We did an awful lot of work on thinking about how the fund could be different, and we explored a range of options with predominantly London Heads of Community Safety across the capital, and they have a great network and group, and we went there several times to do some consultation. I've got to be honest, there were some radical ideas in there. Including not having a kind of borough-based allocation at all, because as soon as you have some kind of formula, you're going to create winners and losers. But instead having sort of biddable funds that people could go into. We looked at a range of options. To be honest, everybody settled, and ultimately it's a political choice to keep borough-based allocations, to not top slice any further or not turn it all into a biddable fund. We looked at various different ways we could run the formula. And ultimately the political decision was made to keep the formula the way it is and just rerun it.
So none of the concerns expressed by the Outer London boroughs were taken on board?
I think the concerns were taken on board. They were listened to. That we modelled various scenarios.
Change?
A decision, advice was presented to the deputy mayor, and the decision was taken to keep the formula as is, but rerun it based on need today.
Yeah, see, one of the problems with the Outer London boroughs is that they're seen as being an easy a softer target, and all of the focus goes into the zone 3 and beyond, and that leaves boroughs more exposed, the outer London boroughs, and that's why we're seeing. I mean, even in my own ward in Richmond upon Thames, Hampton, we saw a gun incident in Hampton. Now, crikey, that's just off the scale in terms of Hampton. This is where we're presenting risk, is by not listening to the outer London boroughs and not making sure that they are properly resourced. Then we can quite readily see an increase in crime and all of the stuff happening very rapidly unless we take on board those criticisms. So I hope next time it comes up for renewal, for a further discussion on the formula, that the views of outer London boroughs will be taken seriously, as it doesn't appear that they have so far.
And can I endorse that? One gun crime is nothing to what Glenn may see in his area, 100%. But we must equally look at the fact that that is happening all over London now. It is getting worse. Crime does seem to be going up. And we have to absolutely understand that all of Londoners, well, most of Londoners pay tax, they pay their rates, they pay everything else, and they are entitled to some of the things that those of us on the outer London see constantly put into inner London. I know the reasons for it, I do understand, but equally, outer London boroughs get very fed up with being left out. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'll be honest, it's all very out of touch, to be honest. This whole, I think this is the most corporate kind of marketing speak of crime that's really scaring Londoners I've ever heard. And to be honest, I think it shows to me why the whole of MOPAC needs to be taken down and reassembled to get rid of a lot of what we're doing. But anyway, with what I've said, and I think what a lot of people would understand from the meeting so far, how do you think that people think, what do you think the average Londoner would think about the £54 million spent on the London Crime Prevention Fund? Do you think most people understand it's there? Do you think people would understand that it's working for them? Do you think that there's good satisfaction with that?
I mean, obviously, I'm obviously somewhat disappointed by your initial observation there, Assemblymember Best. I'm
disappointed.
I would. Well, I mean, I would observe that I'm not a politician. I'm an officer. So I'm not. I may not fully believe that. That's entirely appropriate. I'm sorry. But I'll carry on. So the London Crime Prevention Fund is £13 million a year, so it represents about 15% of MOPAC's total commissioning budget. The fund is designed to be enabling and empowering of our trusted local authority partners. So what we would hope and what we seek to do with the programme is to ensure that boroughs are working on need that is important to them, the discretion of what projects they choose is with them, and the impact story that they create is for them. So I think it will vary on a borough-to-borough basis as to how much residents understand about the impact that that funding has had.
Just to come back to that, well, I think it is entirely inappropriate when we have large amounts of salaries paid out and six-figure salaries to officers. It becomes a political issue that we need to address when we think that that's not delivering for Londoners. And that's why it's entirely appropriate for me to address if I'm disappointed in the way in which MOPAC's behaving and the way in which it's understanding crime and the victims of crime. You say about it's the impact stories of boroughs, but what work, surely that's something you would want to have an influence on, you would want people to understand as well. That's surely not just in the hands of boroughs to create their impact story.
Sure. I mean, I suppose, as a bureaucrat, my position is that I believe that a sufficient amount of monitoring is done on the London Crime Prevention Fund, whereby we can ensure that it's value for money. I believe that impact stories are created, and I believe that officers assemble those impact stories into a way where I can advise the Deputy Mayor whether the fund is having value for money or not. How the Mayor and the organisation then chooses to communicate that, I think has to go in with all the other priorities that we have and all the stories that we want to tell of the great impact that we have for Londoners.
And do you think you're providing value for money for Londoners?
In terms of the London Crime Prevention Fund, or in terms of the entire funding package? So I can talk you through I can talk you through quite technically how we do value for money. I can talk about the sort of 4Es approach. I can talk about valuation.
Do you think that through the Crime Intervention Fund you're providing value for money?
Just through that fund. So that's 15%
do you have a
of
different
our
answer for both then?
No, I just want to clarify. I just want to clarify it's a global answer or not. I'm satisfied that the information that I have about the London Crime Prevention Fund tells me it's having a real impact for Londoners, and therefore I would say it's value for money. Yes.
Okay. Can I make it absolutely clear that any comments are made to the organisation of MOPAC? They are absolutely not personal, and if you think they were, I know Assembly Member Best did not mean it to be personal, so please accept any apologies there. It is a frustration from many of us that so much money goes into things and we don't always see the benefit of it. We don't always see the KPIs or the benefit of it. And I would say, especially those of us that live and work on the outskirts of London, probably see less of it than those that might work in inner London. Please don't take it personally. It is against anything that the organisation is or is not doing. Okay. Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I have to second what the Chair said, and also what the Chair said about out of London. I was born in the middle of London. I now live on the edge of London. I'd argue my new community is as poor and as suffering from crime as my old community, but we seem to get less attention because we don't have the history of inner London boroughs. And I'd really, you as a commissioner, I'd really hope that you would take that back to your team and get them to look at how they view out of London versus inner London. Does the one-size-fits-all approach to allocation of money via the London Crime Prevention Fund risk outer London boroughs receiving less money?
I don't think it risks it, Assembly Member Bailey. I think it's factually correct that London boroughs, outer London boroughs do receive a lower allocation based on need. So I think, so first of all, what I'd say is that it is only 15% of what MOPAC commissions. Mm-hmm. MOPAC commissions a lot of pan-London services which are independent of LCPF. So, you may not be able to answer this question, but I would hazard a guess that most of those services then find themselves in London anyway. Well, I mean, in the sense that a demand-led victim service will have more people in it who are victims of crime, and there are more victims of crime in central London. Then yeah, we don't do preventative services at MOPAC. Our services are for those who unfortunately have experienced a victimisation or who are offenders. They'll never, because the services respond to something that has happened. Predominantly the ones I commission, the ones that are in that briefing, then it'll be where the need is. So yes, if there are less victims in Kingston, then there will be less money spent on victim support in Kingston if you extrapolate it out.
That's a fair
response. But it's a needs independent. It's a needs independent commission. It's not please don't work in Richmond. It's provide support for all Londoners.
Okay, that's a reasonable response. You're trying to follow the need, but this would suggest that there's a one-size-fits-all. So you're happy that the services you commission are borough blind, borough agnostic. They're just pursuing where the need is. Is that what you would suggest?
So for the Pan-London services, yes, absolutely. Where we've got services which are more pilot and test, then those are a mix. So, for example, some of those DA perpetrator interventions I mentioned happen in outer London boroughs. And the reason they happen there is because that's where the gravity was. Those were the boroughs that wanted to work on those things. They wanted to match fund. They were interested in supporting it. So it's probably, in that case, it's less need and more sort of borough interest. I think the reality is, and I say this as a former local government officer, resources are really stretched. So where we want to match, where we want to work with a borough because we think we want to pilot something, test something, change something, the importance of that issue to that borough is really important too. So sometimes, yeah, so there isn't, it's not necessarily in or out of London or anything like that. It's more often, do those boroughs want to come forward and
that's
work with
also
us?
reasonable. I accept that you have to find a partner, and I suppose we're relying on your partner as elected members, as a borough authority, to highlight its own issues. I accept that. I think that's a reasonable response. When your victim services in particular, you say they're a response to something happening. How much of that response talks to the responsibility of the perpetrator? So are you just focusing entirely on the victim, or is there any work done around the person who's perpetrated that to help them not do that again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really, I suppose, without wishing to go through every commission programme and annoy the chair again by speaking for too long, I did provide a little pack of information, which I appreciate came at short notice, so I do apologise for that. It's just, it was quite, we came at short notice, as it were. I think that talks through a number of perpetrator interventions, some of which, as I said, are some of the most evidence-based interventions that we have in the system. So integrated offender management, DRIVE, which is our Dear Perpetrator programme, STAC, which is for stalking. These are GPS tagging. These are sort of gold-plated programme in terms of the evidence base.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's two things. I sit where my colleague A.M. Best sits. I think there's a lot of fluff around this, but I do accept a few things you've just spoken about there. I actually think are good things. I want to acknowledge that. And I particularly like the idea of testing. Government doesn't do enough risk taking, and you testing and seeing if a thing is good or bad and accepting it may be bad, but the investment is worth the risk. I genuinely think it's a good thing, and I'd commend you to keep doing that. My last question is this: what evaluation work has MOPAC undertaken over the last 3 years on the impact of top slicing the London Crime Prevention Fund by 30% to create co-commissioning fund?
Sure. So the top slice happened. The top slice happened, I think, in 2018. So those conversations predate me. But I've looked into the history because I thought you might ask the question. And the idea of the top slice was twofold, really. One was that there was need that we wanted to meet, and when I say we as a system, this wasn't, I understand, something MOPAC did alone. It's something it did in consultation and was supported by boroughs. Now I can't speak to that because I wasn't here at the time, but that was my understanding. And particular needs were identified, and quite a long process was run to understand which programmes people wanted to do. At the end of that, four programmes came out that became part of that top slice, the first bit of the top slice. So one of those is something called Rescue and Response, which is a brilliant, fully evaluated scheme for young people who are involved in county.
Can I just pause you? Don't go through the four programmes. I want to keep a helicopter view on this. And just to be clear, Rescue and Response was very weak in the beginning, actually, but that's why I don't want to go through the things. We'll be sidelined. I just want to understand the impact it's had. Has it been generally good or bad?
Yeah. So there's absolutely no fluff here. Mm-hmm. There's a clear theory of change on Rescue and Response. There's a published, high-quality evaluation.
There wasn't in the beginning. I don't want to talk about Rescue and Response. I want to talk about the general principle of top slicing. Has it been effective? Is it something you consider you'll continue to do?
So the top slice has resulted in programmes that still exist now, all of which have been fully evaluated, and all of which have met need or exceeded what they set out to do. That's female offending, that's LGBT support for sexual violence, and that's Rescue Response, which is now part of the Violence and Exploitation Service. Unquestionably, that has had an impact that is some of the strongest in this sector, and that is an independent evaluation. So I can't speak more highly of the value for money of those services.
So you would say that the top slicing has been successful, is something that should continue?
So we've decided, as I said, the political decision makers, the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor, have decided not to top slice further the London Crime Prevention Fund, despite the fact that MOPAC has had to take on additional commissioning responsibilities, including the London-wide appropriate adult service and increased commissioning demand around sexual assault referral centres. So we've chosen the decisions made not to top slice further.
So those projects that the two projects that you were beginning to evidence, you seem to suggest that they've been very effective. Will they disappear, or will they will they still exist?
So the Rescue and Response Service is now part of the Violence and Exploitation Service, which you have a slide on, which went live recently.
Right.
So that is sustained. The Female Offending sorry, I was asked not to list the services, but obviously I have to now. Yeah. The Female Offending Co-Commissioning Service has been incredibly successful in doing what we were describing earlier about piloting and testing a model, which is now the model in London for female offending. We co-commission it with probation. It's an outstanding service.
And you didn't say if it will be sustained or not.
It will be sustained.
Okay.
So it's been co-commissioned with probation.
Okay.
It's one of the things that probation are correcting. And the last one, which is male and LGBT sexual violence support. In your pack, I described a really needs and evidence-based service design approach to how we can better meet need of sexual violence survivors. There's absolutely no fluff about that. It has a clear understanding of need, a very clear logic model, very clear outcomes framework. We've commissioned against that outcomes framework, so that service will be absorbed into that bit of commissioning.
Okay. That's what I want to understand. Not if they're effective or not. You've made your decision that just have they continued to be funded, because that would suggest that the top slicing did work. That was my point. Chair, back to you.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Roberts. Oh, except I forgot to put my microphone on as well.
So did I.
It's contagious today. I don't know what's the matter with all of us. Okay, well, how does MOPAC create the targets for commissioned services it includes in its quarterly reporting?
So I'll go with quarterly reporting first. So quarterly reporting isn't designed to give an indicator for every service. It's designed to give a sort of illustrative spread of the things that MOPAC commissioned. The pack I presented to you, I think very straightforwardly showed that there's an enormous range of things that we do. So we've selected some indicators which we think help us to tell a story, but also help us to galvanise partners. So one of the features of what MOPAC does is there's almost nothing we do alone. So there's almost nothing that we commission without a partner or without somebody else involved. So often we'll choose indicators that highlight partnerships with the police, or partnerships with probation, or partnerships with boroughs. And we don't just choose things that are going to be green all the time. Because we want to demonstrate we want to use quarterly reporting to help us in some of those conversations with partners too.
Okay, so given that we're not seeing all of them, what percentage of them receive a red rating?
What percentage of KPIs?
Yeah.
So at the moment, we have. So there are a couple in the quarterly report.
Yeah.
But remember, that will be one KPI out of a few for that service that we've selected. I mean, I think your question is: are there? Sorry, I don't mean to paraphrase. If I'm paraphrasing poorly, I think what you may be asking is, out of the sort of 80-odd services we deliver, how many of those am I worried about? Is that the sort of question?
Well, how many should I be worried about? How many receive a red rating?
Out of those 80 services?
Yeah.
So at the moment, there are a number of services. I described earlier that we are under enormous pressure in the criminal justice system.
I accept that. Going back to the question, how many? Because if you're only choosing some to publicise.
Yeah. So at the moment, I would say there are 5 that I would call red out of about 80. Yeah.
And you publicised 2 of those.
That's right, but when we chose those, all 10 of them could have been red, by now, or all 10 of them could be green. I mean, I can't see into the future.
Can you send us a list of those that received a red rating then, so that we can see for ourselves? Because if you're cherry picking what you're putting out there.
Well, I don't think I'm cherry picking. I mean, I think.
What term would you use? I want you to be comfortable with the term. I'm inferring cherry picking.
We've selected some indicators. So if you think so first of all, most of the indicators that are there fall into 2 brackets that we look at providers for. One is an output measure of some description, a performance story, and one might be what we call early signs of success, so some kind of proxy outcome measure. Also in that quarterly report are the big outcome measures for the top-level outcomes in the police and crime plan. And those are the sort of real headline stats, aren't they? So if we've got a theory of change between what we're doing and those headline stats, I suppose what I'm saying is output measures might tell you something about mobilisation, but they're probably not going to tell you much about impact or effectiveness. What is going to tell you about impact or effectiveness? I mean, if your question is, what do we think is having a real bang for its buck? It's those hardcore published evaluations. So I'd be reluctant to say, the following services maybe are working with, they should be working with people 6 months, they're working with people 12 months. I'm not entirely sure what that would tell us, because we know that actually they're going to be in the criminal justice system for 4 or 5 times more. So, I'm happy to have a conversation about individual services, happy to do anything. I just think sending out of context KPIs, I'm just not sure how that will help the committee's understanding.
Well, I don't know how it helps anybody's understanding if you only publicise some of them. If you're saying there are 5 that you're concerned about, they're red rating, or what you would term as red rating. I don't know how that's different from how I would term red rating. Perhaps there's a big difference. I just wonder why you've chosen those 2, and we haven't seen them all. We can't make a judgment when we're seeing a part of a picture.
Sure. I mean, look, I'm happy to pick that up outside the room.
Okay, fair enough. I tell you what, then. There's 80 services. You've obviously got the RAG system, the rating system, on them, because you must be needing those for your managerial decisions. So why don't you send all of them to us, and then we can look at them and see if there's anything that we've picked up that we're interested in looking at, because we are supposed to be here scrutinising. If we can only find some of the things that are important, and you've not cherry-picked because you don't like that term, but you have chosen to show us some of those. If you send them all to us, it would be an interesting project for us to look at.
I'm gonna get back to you on that. What I would much rather share with you is evaluations.
Why is there a problem with sharing that with us?
Well, because I think our opinions actually may differ on what a key performance indicator is.
But then that's fine.
Okay, I'm happy to provide you a measure for every service and RAG rate it. Absolutely. I mean, it exists for everything. If that's what you'd like. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yes, I mean, this mayor has told us he's the most transparent mayor in the whole wide world ever. So we'd love to see that.
I mean, and absolutely happy to do that. I suppose, all I would say is if what we want to do, which I think is what we want to do, is be transparent about are these services having an impact. A performance metric is one of the least helpful ways of doing that.
But
I'm happy to provide it.
But it is a way. So that would be helpful.
I think it's okay.
Okay,
sure.
I'll bring you in when I finish my questions. So if a service gets a red RAG rating, what would you then do with that particular service?
So I think the answer is it really depends. We have an enormous range of commissioning, and I think hopefully the pack illustrates that. So we have some services which are £10 million a year, and some services maybe which might be the recipient of a small grant. That are going to be sub £50,000 a year. You would not expect me to take the same approach with those providers. So if it's a large contract, those indicators will be within the contract itself. Sometimes, often, there will be financial penalties or financial things if those things aren't met. Equally, we pay outcome bonuses and outcome payments at the moment in some of our contracts. So those conversations take place in quarterly contract monitoring meeting. We don't actually release any payments at MOPAC until that quarterly monitoring has taken place. If it was a big contract and we saw performance was dwindling, we would seek to understand why. And I think, as I was saying, we need to accept in the current climate where many of these services haven't had an uplift because they're funded from elsewhere, and the system they work in is very challenging. We'd want to understand and attribute why a performance metric may be falling. Is it the provider? Is it the system? To what extent are both? And that would be a constructive conversation between the providers.
Yeah.
We do get to the point where occasionally we do claw back, or we do equally more often trigger an outcome payment. If it's a sort of medium-sized contract, then, you know, again, we would do something similar. Those often don't have the same financial sort of clauses in them, because that wouldn't be appropriate for something of that size. But again, we would seek to have a conversation with the provider to understand that performance.
Okay. In all the time that you've been in position, how many services have you pulled the money from because they're just not performing as they should do?
Pulled the money from. There are services that have been recommissioned to different. You know, they've gone to different providers. There have been services where we've put providers on a performance improvement notice, at least half a dozen. I can't think of one that we've had to decommission because the performance has become unacceptably low in my time here, off the top of my head.
Not one.
I don't believe so. No.
Remind me, how much does MOPAC? What's the funding for MOPAC per year?
For the total organisation, the commissioning budget, just from the mayor.
The commissioning budget.
So the commissioning budget, including the domestic abuse safe accommodation duty, which we commission on behalf of the Greater London Authority, so the budget actually sits with them, but we do the commissioning, is 90 million this year.
Yeah, you see, it's our job to be asking these questions.
Sure.
I am amazed that you haven't had to pull money from anywhere, but...
Well, there is a way of looking at that is we probably, you know, we have, you know, everything is, we have a really good procurement. So when we do procure things, we have really good contracts. We shouldn't be, if we're clawing things back, if we're pulling the plug from providers, to be honest, that speaks quite ill of our commissioning. You know, it means we made bad choices. So I actually think it's a really good, successful metric that, you know, I don't think public sector good contract management is, is cancelling contracts. I think actually that's poor commissioning.
OK, coming from the private sector, perhaps I'd take a different view. Did you want to come in quickly, Lord Bailey, very quickly, before I finish my question?
Very quickly. I'm always here trying to champion for the little man. I like the idea that you would commission something and then support it if the performance went down. But you seem to, is that the same for smaller organisations? Do you have a mechanism, staff, MOPAC in general, that would say, OK, we may have only given you £50,000, but we'd like to keep that performance up, and here's how?
100%. So, I mean, we actually fund sort of proper capacity building and proper support for particularly smaller organisations in a couple of spaces, one of which is
Is that everybody, or just for ones you funded? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's for everybody. So MOPAC doesn't deliver any services directly to Londoners with the exception of police complaints review itself. We need a sector to do this, and because of the way we understand need, we know that we need actually a good combination of large but also small specialist organisations to help us do that. So we need to see providers thrive. And whilst there are grants, something like the Vaughan Grassroots Fund, whilst there are recipients of that grant who are specifically getting that to capacity build and later on become big providers, there's also offer in there for capacity building for everyone. So those are the places we might signpost to, but also, you know, we do it ourselves. So, you know, a lot of our commissioners, myself included, came from the voluntary sector, came from provider backgrounds. Some even came from the private sector. You know, we do think part of the skill of a commissioner is to work with providers to do exactly that. As I say, we want to see people succeed, not fail.
We could agree on that part. Just to back up the chair's notion that we should be provided with the KPIs, the outcomes of these 80 projects. This isn't about attacking those projects. It's about understanding who's doing well, who's doing and why. So, but this goes to my particular problem with MOPAC in general and the VRU as well. We have to beg, cajole, fight to get these stats. Your culture should be putting it out there for us, because we are the people who are meant to be scrutinised, and we could be of help if we didn't have to fight so hard to get this information in the first place. So I think the chair's notion that we should be sent this information is entirely correct. Back to you, Chair.
OK, I think it would be really helpful if we could have the value of each of the services listed in the pack and the duration or time frame, if you like, of each of those services. Can you?
So actually, that's all in the public domain already. So every single commission has a published decision. you can look at the service and find that decision. They're all published, and you can find out how long it was for and what the value was. So, yeah, you've got
If
that
you
already.
could send that, that would be really helpful. I've got 2 questions which I'm not going to ask, but we'll put them in writing to you, only for time reasons. I'd be really grateful then if we could have a written response to these 2 questions. So I'll go now on to Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going back to that letter from the committee back in 2020 because one of the other things that we asked about was a map or directory of funded services to be updated on a regular basis. Now, I think there is a map of LCPF funded services which is still live, but it doesn't seem to have been updated with live data for some years since it was launched in 2018-19. And I think, you know, the team on the scrutiny team have not managed to find a map of services directly commissioned by MOPAC either. Now, obviously, updating services, things on websites is, you know, it's a perennial problem, keeping these things up to date. But my question is, you know, given the sort of complex nature of the commissioning landscape in London, do you think MOPAC could commit to creating a live digital map of the commissioned services across the city?
So I'd love to, Assemblymember Russell. I mean, hopefully the pack I've given you demonstrates that information is very much available, and we know what boroughs all of these programmes work is. What I'm slightly held back on is capacity. You know, MOPAC is a small organisation, so we have to do things. You know, we have to do things all in one go at a point when we can. So the plan, as I understand it, I'm not. I'm a board member, so I'm responsible for the organisation, but I don't do comms. Is that we're planning in line with the new police and crime plan when that's published, a sort of refresh of everything that MOPAC's got in the public domain. That will include what all our commission services do. Because I want to tell a better story about this. You know, I'm really proud. You know, as I say, I don't want to be accused of anything, but you know, I'm really proud of these services. They're having a massive impact. I know the stories. You know, I meet people who experience these services all the time, and you know, I'd love to tell Londoners more.
Have you thought about making sure that the boroughs include all the MOPAC services in their directories? So, I mean, you know, they'd need obviously have to have that information provided to them by MOPAC, but if you have a list of the services and the boroughs they're delivered in, then perhaps you could be partnering up and getting those boroughs to also make that information available.
I think it's a really good idea. I mean, we've just started to heads of community safety into boroughs, giving them a bit more of a newsletter about what MOPAC's been up to, because we tend to talk about people on a single issue basis, whereas MOPAC obviously isn't a single issue organisation. So I think it's a really great suggestion. Thank you. I'll look into that.
Take it away. Thank you very much, Chair.
You said you're a very small organisation, which I accept, but you've increased the staffing quite considerably, haven't you?
Not in my area, Assemblymember Hall. So I've got 32 full-time equivalents, which is the same number as when I started 4 years ago. I do have some project-funded posts. They don't do commissioning. They do things like run that GPS scheme or run the Youth to Adult Transitions Hub. So that brings the number up slightly, or they're doing the domestic abuse duty. But yeah, I've got 32 full-time, but they don't all work on what we might call commissioning. It's probably about half of their job. So really, I've got about sort of 15 people for 90 million spend. That's about a 1.5% overhead. That would be some of the lowest commissioning overhead in the entire public sector.
OK, I'll have to ask somebody else from MOPAC, because I know...
I know you like the numbers, so I had them already.
No, I know, and you've been loving to tell us all. I'm pleased about that, but it's the numbers that we haven't seen that I'm more interested in, as ever. Assemblymember Bailey, very, very quickly.
I just have to push back. The information isn't easily available. That's been the entire theme of this meeting, both for Lib and New. It's not easily available, and it isn't about telling stories. It's about delivering accurate information that we can scrutinise. And I really want to put that on record. It is not easily available. It's been the theme. This is my third term. It's my third term as an Assembly member, and this has been perennial from the first to third now. If somebody has to scrape all this information together and it's really difficult, it is not easily available. I really want to make that point.
Okay, well, it's good that we're not disagreeing. That is very good. One very, very quick point before we finish. Given that the new police and crime plan is not out, but it is still due to be published very, very soon, what areas of commissioning is MOPAC likely to prioritise in the new years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of our commissioning is dictated by the external funding that we get, but there are sort of 8 core areas where I see us doing more of that innovation and more of that impact stuff that I think we do best. Part of that is about joining up with the Met's new children's strategy. They need a child-first criminal justice system around them. So I'm really excited about work we can do in that space. We're being more and more successful in reducing the reoffending of high harm offenders through things like IOM and other programs that we've talked about. I think our relationship probation is really strong. I see us doing more in that space. We've got a lot of work which is about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. You know, that may be the sort of bigger commissioning, which isn't just about money, but we've got to make better progress there. I think with victim services, we've got the ecosystem model. I want to go further, and MOPAC will go further in terms of integrating victim services. We're doing a lot. We're going to be recommissioning our services for victims of hate crime in the next term, which I think is going to be really important. We're transforming our support to victims of domestic abuse, which again is going to be really important. And we're also going to have a long-term London-wide approach to preventing violence against women and girls. I think it's good that we finished there in the 16 days of activism.
Yeah, well, we talk about women and girls and the work going on there, but it still seems to be quite bad. But anyway, I thank you for coming. Thank you for coming at short notice and producing things for us. And I'm sure we'll write to you asking for the answers to the questions I haven't asked and for the information, particularly on the KPIs or the RAG system. So thank you for attending this morning and for answering our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on Wednesday, the 18th of December at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.